Welcome to Detective Reddington's office. Take a seat and listen to this story. It will be interesting. Natalie and I, Ethan, have been married for 4 years. We're both in our mid-20s, and from the outside, it looks like we're living the perfect life. We both have solid jobs. She works as a seamstress at a local factory, and I'm chasing a promotion to vice president at my company. We've been saving up, planning to buy a house in 6 months. Once I get promoted, Natalie could stop working and focus on starting the family she's always dreamed of. She loves kids, and becoming a mother has always been her biggest wish. It was a Friday in early April. I woke up early for work. Today was crucial for my promotion. I had a presentation to give, and if everything went well, I'd be a step closer to securing the VP position. When I walked out of the bathroom, Natalie was already up, smiling at me. "Good luck with your presentation today. Don't forget to come home early tonight. I have something special planned," she said. Her words were thoughtful, but I could tell she had something on her mind. It was rare for Natalie to make specific plans like this, especially with how hectic our schedules had been lately. I brushed it off, thinking maybe she just wanted a nice evening together. After all, she had been very understanding about the long hours I had been putting in. The presentation at work went well. A few senior board members congratulated me afterward, making me feel confident that the promotion was within reach. By the time I got home, I was in high spirits. As I walked up the stairs, I saw Natalie standing by the door, dressed to impress. She looked stunning, clearly ready for the evening. "Wow, you look amazing. Where are we going?" I asked, whistling as I walked in. She smiled, that kind of smile that always caught me off guard. "I booked a table at that new French restaurant downtown. You've been working so hard to secure our future. I thought you deserved something special." I wasn't a big fan of fancy restaurants. I preferred burgers and fries over gourmet meals, but I didn't mind giving Natalie the special night she wanted. It was clear that she had put thought into this evening, and honestly, I was looking forward to it too. After freshening up, we headed out. The restaurant was small but cozy, located not far from the city center. As we sat down, we ordered appetizers and started chatting about my presentation and how everything went at work. But something about Natalie seemed off. She was quieter than usual, a bit distracted, and her phone was on the table. A clear violation of our no phones during dinner rule. It wasn't like her. Midway through our conversation, a young woman, maybe in her early 20s, approached our table. She introduced herself as Holly, a psychology student conducting a survey for her thesis. She politely asked if we could participate in her study. "I'm sorry," I said. "We're here to celebrate something special tonight. Maybe another time." Holly looked confused, almost like she wasn't expecting me to say no. But before I could push the conversation further, Natalie jumped in. "Ethan, it's just a few questions. I'm sure we can spare a minute," she said, which surprised me. Natalie usually hated interruptions like this, especially during our rare nights out. Something about the situation didn't sit right with me, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. As the questions started, I became increasingly uncomfortable. Holly asked about relationships, marriage, and even threw in a question about infidelity. My responses were short, direct. I wasn't interested in playing along. Natalie, however, seemed unusually engaged in the conversation. When Holly finally left, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't just the questions or the strange tension in the air. It was the man who had entered the restaurant earlier, sitting with Holly. He seemed familiar, like I had seen him before, and he had been watching our table closely the entire time. By the time we left the restaurant, something about the night felt off. Natalie was still being polite and cheerful, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something. That strange man from earlier was still on my mind. His eyes had followed us the entire time, and I had no idea why. "Wasn't that fun?" Natalie asked, trying to sound upbeat as we drove home. "I'm glad we did something different." I nodded absent-mindedly, glancing at her. "Yeah. But did you know that girl who came up to us? Holly, was it?" She seemed a little too comfortable. Natalie hesitated for a second before shaking her head. "No, just a random student doing her project." You know how college kids can be, always needing data for something. She said it casually, but there was a crack in her voice that I couldn't ignore. It wasn't like Natalie to brush things off so quickly, especially when she was normally so detailed. We drove the rest of the way in silence. When we got home, I sat on the couch, still replaying the dinner in my mind. Natalie went to take a shower, but her phone buzzed on the counter. It was a text. The name flashing on the screen stopped me cold. Richard Monroe. I didn't know anyone by that name, and for a brief moment, I considered ignoring it. But the tension in my gut told me otherwise. I picked up the phone and glanced at the screen. Asterisk, good seeing you tonight. Can't wait to meet up again. Asterisk, my chest tightened. What the hell was going on? I wasn't one to invade her privacy, but this felt different. Natalie had been acting strange for weeks now, and everything about tonight only heightened my suspicions. I put the phone back down just as Natalie came out of the bathroom, a towel wrapped around her. She smiled, but I saw something behind that smile. A wall between us. I'm exhausted, she said. I'm going to bed early. I nodded, feeling a strange sense of disconnection as I watched her leave the room. I knew I had to find out more about this Richard Monroe. Something in me had shifted. Trust, once solid and unshakable, now felt like sand slipping through my fingers. The next morning, I couldn't stop thinking about that text. Who was this man, and why was he messaging my wife? When I left for work, I decided to do something I had never done before. I texted Ben, my best friend, and asked for advice. Ben had always been a straight shooter, someone who didn't sugarcoat the truth, and I needed someone like that in my corner now. When I told him about the situation, Ben's response was immediate. Asterisk, you need to get to the bottom of this. That text isn't something you can ignore. Asterisk, he was right. I couldn't just let this go. But I wasn't going to jump to conclusions either. I needed answers, but I didn't want to accuse Natalie without proof. Maybe there was a perfectly reasonable explanation for all of this. Maybe I was overreacting. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. That night, when Natalie went to bed, I stayed up, doing something I never thought I would, searching through her phone while she slept. I hated myself for it, but I couldn't live in this uncertainty anymore. I needed to know. I found a string of messages between her and Richard Monroe. They had been talking for weeks. Dinner plans, meeting up while I was at work, compliments about how much he missed her. My heart sank with each new message I read. This wasn't just a casual acquaintance. This was something much worse. I put the phone down, my hands shaking. The reality of what I had just discovered hit me like a freight train. Natalie, the woman I had built my life with, had been lying to me. She had betrayed me. I sat in the dark, trying to process what to do next. My mind raced with 1,000 questions, none of them with answers I wanted to hear. How long had this been going on? How could she have done this to me? The next morning, the weight of what I had discovered the night before hung heavy over me. I could barely look at Natalie as she moved around the house, getting ready for work. Every smile she gave me, every casual conversation, felt like a lie. But I wasn't ready to confront her yet. Not without knowing how deep this betrayal went. Natalie left for work, kissing me goodbye like she did every morning. It was almost unbearable, the casualness of it all. How long had she been living this double life? How could she look me in the eyes and pretend everything was fine? Once she was gone, I knew I couldn't just sit back and do nothing. I needed more answers, and I wasn't going to find them by waiting. I called Ben again and told him everything. What I'd found on Natalie's phone, the messages with Richard Monroe, the dinner plans behind my back. Ben didn't hesitate. Ethan, you need to confront her. This is serious. But don't go into it blindly. If you're going to confront her, be prepared for what comes next. I knew he was right, but I wasn't ready for that conversation just yet. I needed to understand the full scope of this affair. I needed to know who Richard Monroe was and how deep his relationship with Natalie went. I decided to do a little research. I started by searching for Richard online, looking for any information that could explain how they knew each other. It didn't take long to find him. He was a local businessman, well known in the community. He owned a few upscale restaurants in town and was often featured in local business magazines. But that didn't answer my biggest question. Why was he texting my wife? Later that evening, after dinner, Natalie said she had some emails to catch up on for work and excused herself to the bedroom. It felt like the perfect opportunity to do some digging of my own. I texted Ben, letting him know what I was planning. Be careful, Ethan. You might not like what you find. Was his reply. I already knew I wouldn't, but I had to do it. While Natalie was in the bedroom, I grabbed her phone again. My hands trembled as I scrolled through her recent messages. I found more texts from Richard. This time, they were making plans to meet later in the week. He wrote about how much he was looking forward to seeing her, how great their last evening together had been. My stomach turned. I scrolled further back, finding messages that were more explicit. They had been seeing each other regularly for months. Every time I was at work, putting in long hours to build our future, Natalie had been sneaking off to see Richard. She was living two lives, one with me and one with him. I felt sick. How could she do this? How could she look me in the eye every day and pretend like everything was normal? I couldn't hold it in any longer. The confrontation I had been avoiding was inevitable now. I put the phone down and walked to the bedroom. Natalie was sitting on the bed, her laptop open. She looked up and smiled, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside me. "Hey, everything okay?" she asked casually. I stood there for a moment trying to find the right words. My heart pounded in my chest, and my mind raced with everything I wanted to say. Finally, I spoke. "Who is Richard Monroe?" Her smile faltered. For a split second, I saw the panic flash in her eyes, but she quickly composed herself. "What do you mean?" she asked, trying to sound innocent. "I found your texts with him, Natalie. I know you've been seeing him." "I know everything," I said, my voice steady but shaking with anger. Natalie froze, her face paling. She didn't say anything at first, just stared at me, trying to process that her secret was out. Then, she finally spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "Ethan, I can explain." I held up my hand, cutting her off. "I don't want excuses. I want the truth. How long has this been going on? How long have you been lying to me?" Her eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, I thought she was going to tell me everything. But instead, she stayed silent, her guilt written all over her face. That silence was all the answer I needed. Natalie's silence hit me like a punch to the gut. She wasn't denying it. She wasn't even trying to come up with an excuse. The weight of her betrayal settled in, and the air between us grew thick with tension. I stood there, waiting for her to speak, to give me some kind of explanation, but nothing came. Finally, she broke the silence. "Ethan, I didn't want you to find out like this," she said, her voice shaky, eyes filling with tears. "I never meant for this to happen." My anger flared up at her words. "You never meant for this to happen?" I snapped. "You've been lying to me for months. Don't stand there and act like this was some accident. You made a choice, Natalie. Every time you saw him, every time you lied to my face, you made a choice." She winced at my words, but I didn't stop. The hurt, the betrayal, the anger, it all came pouring out. "I've been working my ass off to build a future for us, to give you everything you wanted. A house, a family, a life together. And this whole time, you've been sneaking around behind my back with him. Do you even understand what you've done?" Natalie wiped away her tears, looking at me with a mixture of guilt and desperation. "I know, Ethan. I know I've hurt you, but it's not as simple as you think." "Not as simple?" I repeated, incredulous. "What could possibly make this more complicated? You lied. You cheated. What else is there to understand?" She hesitated, then looked down at her hands. "It wasn't just about Richard. I've been unhappy for a long time, Ethan. We've been growing apart, and I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't know how to talk to you about it." Her words cut deep. Growing apart? I hadn't noticed. I thought everything had been fine. Sure, we were both busy with work, and life wasn't as carefree as it used to be, but that's just part of marriage, right? People go through tough times. They don't run off and have affairs to fix things. I shook my head, still trying to process what she was saying. So your solution was to cheat on me? Instead of talking to me, instead of trying to fix things together, you decided to go behind my back and have an affair. Natalie looked up at me, her face pale, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't plan it, Ethan. It just happened. And once it started, I couldn't stop. I didn't want to hurt you, but I couldn't walk away. Her words hung in the air, and I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. So you chose to keep lying to me, to keep seeing him, and to let me think everything was okay? You watched me plan our future while you were building something else with him. She didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. Her silence told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't a one-time mistake or a moment of weakness. It was months of deceit, months of living a double life. I turned away from her, the room spinning as I tried to make sense of it all. This woman, the one I had trusted more than anyone else in the world, had betrayed me in the worst possible way. And now, here we were, me shattered, and her still trying to justify the unjustifiable. After what felt like an eternity, I spoke again, my voice quieter now. I don't know what to do with this, Natalie. I don't know how to forgive you. She stepped closer, reaching out to me, her hand trembling. Ethan, I still love you. I never stopped loving you. I flinched at her touch, stepping back. Don't say that. If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this. Tears streamed down her face as she pleaded. Please, Ethan, we can fix this. I'll end things with Richard. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. Just give me a chance. Her words echoed in my head, but I couldn't see how anything could ever be right again. The trust was gone, and with it, the foundation of our marriage had crumbled. How could I ever look at her the same way? How could I believe anything she said from now on? I don't know if there's anything left to fix, I said, my voice hoarse. You broke us, Natalie, and I don't know if I can put the pieces back together. After that night, things were never the same between us. Natalie tried her best to make up for what she had done. She apologized constantly, told me over and over again how much she regretted it, how she wanted to fix things. But no matter how many times she said it, the damage was done. Our marriage was cracked, and I wasn't sure it could ever be repaired. The next few days passed in a fog. I went to work, but my mind wasn't there. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the messages from Richard. I pictured them together, laughing, meeting in secret, betraying me over and over again. It gnawed at me, that image of them. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't push it away. I stopped talking to Natalie. I couldn't look at her without feeling the pain of her betrayal. She kept trying to reach out, but every attempt only made it worse. I needed space, time to think. But it was hard to think clearly when my entire world had been turned upside down. Ben called me a few times, checking in on me, but I didn't have much to say. I wasn't ready to share how deeply this was affecting me. Even though I knew he'd understand, I couldn't bring myself to admit how shattered I felt inside. One night, a few days after the confrontation, Natalie asked if we could talk. I had been avoiding it, but I knew I couldn't dodge the conversation forever. She deserved to know where I stood, and I needed to make a decision about what came next. We sat down in the living room, and for the first time in days, I forced myself to meet her eyes. I know I've hurt you, Natalie said softly, but I want us to get through this. I'm willing to do whatever it takes. Ethan, I'll cut all ties with Richard, I'll go to therapy with you. Anything. Just don't give up on us. Her words hung in the air, desperate and pleading. But as much as I wanted to believe her, to trust her again, I wasn't sure if I could. How am I supposed to get past this? I asked, my voice heavy with frustration. You broke my trust, Natalie. How do I believe anything you say now? She looked down at her hands, tears welling up in her eyes. I know I've destroyed your trust, and I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but I'm asking for a chance to make things right. I ran a hand through my hair, feeling the weight of her words. Part of me wanted to believe her, to believe that we could somehow rebuild what had been lost. But another part of me, the part that felt the full force of her betrayal, was screaming that it was impossible. I don't know if I can do this, I said, my voice cracking. I don't know if I can forgive you. Natalie's face crumpled, her tears now falling freely. Ethan, please, don't say that. Don't give up on us. I'll do anything. Just tell me what I need to do. I stood up, pacing the room, trying to gather my thoughts. How had we ended up here? Just a few weeks ago, I had thought we were on track to build a future together, buying a house, starting a family. And now all of that was in ruins. You've done enough, I said, my voice colder than I intended. I just need some time to figure this out. Natalie nodded, wiping her tears. Take all the time you need. I'll be here waiting. I'll do whatever it takes. She sounded sincere, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was too late. The damage was too deep. Even if she ended things with Richard, even if we went to therapy, how could I ever trust her again? How could I ever look at her and not think about the lies, the affair, the betrayal? That night, I slept on the couch. Natalie stayed in the bedroom, probably crying herself to sleep. But I couldn't be near her. Not yet. As I lay there, staring at the ceiling, I thought about everything we had been through. The good times, the plans we made, the love we shared. And then I thought about what she had done, the secrets, the deception, the affair with Richard. It was like two separate realities clashing in my mind, and I didn't know which one to believe anymore. I needed time. Time to figure out if our marriage was worth saving, or if it was already too late. The days that followed were filled with silence and tension. Natalie tried to give me space, but I could feel her watching me, waiting for some sign that I was ready to talk, to forgive. But I couldn't. Every time I looked at her, all I saw was the betrayal. The man who had once loved her completely was gone, replaced by someone who couldn't trust her anymore. I went through the motions, going to work, coming home, eating dinner, but none of it felt real. Everything I did felt mechanical, like I was on autopilot, just trying to get through each day. My mind kept replaying what I had seen on her phone. The messages, the plans, the lies, consumed me. Ben reached out again, asking how I was holding up. I told him the truth, that I didn't know what to do, that I was torn between trying to save the marriage and walking away from it all. I don't think there's any going back from this, I admitted. No matter how hard I try, I can't see her the same way anymore. Maybe that's your answer, Ben replied. Sometimes, things are broken beyond repair. And that's okay, Ethan. You don't owe anyone your forgiveness. His words hit me hard. I had been struggling with the idea that I needed to forgive Natalie to move forward. But Ben was right. I didn't owe her anything. She had made her choices, and now I had to make mine. A few nights later, the tension reached a breaking point. Natalie came into the living room while I was sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the TV. She stood there for a moment, as if gathering the courage to speak. I can't keep living like this, she said quietly. The silence is killing me, Ethan. We need to talk. I didn't look at her. What's there left to say? She took a deep breath and sat down next to me. I've been thinking about us, about what happened. I know I broke your trust, and I know I hurt you. But we can't just live in this limbo forever. We need to decide what's next. I turned to face her, feeling the weight of her words. What's next? You want me to just forget what you did and pretend everything's fine? No, she said quickly. I know you can't just forget, and I'm not asking you to, but I'm asking you to try. I'm asking you to give me a chance to make things right. I stared at her, my heart heavy with conflict. Part of me wanted to try, wanted to believe that we could somehow rebuild what had been lost. But another part of me, the part that had been broken by her betrayal, wasn't so sure. How am I supposed to trust you again? I asked, my voice strained. How do I know you won't hurt me like this again? She looked down, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I don't have an easy answer for that. All I can say is that I'll do everything in my power to earn your trust back. I know it won't be easy, but I'm willing to fight for us. Her words hung in the air, and I could feel the desperation in her voice. She wanted to fix this, but the truth was, I wasn't sure if I wanted to fight anymore. I don't know if I can do this, I said, my voice breaking. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. Natalie's face crumpled, tears spilling down her cheeks. Please, Ethan, don't say that. I love you. I've always loved you. I made a mistake, but that doesn't mean we can't fix this. We can rebuild what we had. I stood up, the frustration and anger boiling inside me. A mistake? You didn't just make a mistake, Natalie. You made a choice. Over and over again, you chose to betray me. This wasn't some one-time slip-up. It was months of lies. How am I supposed to just move past that? She sobbed, burying her face in her hands. I know I messed up. But please, Ethan, I'm begging you, don't give up on us. Her pleas were heart-wrenching, but I couldn't ignore the reality of what had happened. No matter how much she cried, no matter how many promises she made, the damage was done. I had lost something fundamental, my trust in her, my belief in us. I need to be honest with you, I said, my voice heavy. I don't think I can do this anymore. Natalie looked up at me, her eyes wide with fear. What are you saying? I'm saying, I think it's over, I replied, the words feeling like a final blow to both of us. I don't think we can fix this. There's too much damage. Her face crumpled again, and she broke down into sobs. No, please, Ethan, don't say that. We can try. We can go to counseling, we can. But I couldn't listen anymore. I had already made up my mind. No matter how much I wanted things to be different, I knew in my heart that it was too late. I'm sorry, Natalie, I said softly, but I don't think I can ever forgive you for this. After our conversation, Natalie retreated to the bedroom, her sobs muffled behind the closed door. I stood in the living room, numb, unsure of what to do next. I had said the words I'd been avoiding for days. It was over, but instead of feeling relief, I felt an overwhelming emptiness. The house felt colder, quieter, as if the weight of my decision had sucked the life out of everything around me. I knew I had made the right choice, but that didn't make it any easier to bear. I wasn't just walking away from a broken marriage. I was walking away from the life we had built together, from the future we had planned. I sat down on the couch, staring blankly at the wall. How had things fallen apart so quickly? Just a few months ago, I thought I had everything figured out. A stable job, a loving wife, plans to start a family. And now all of it was gone, shattered. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, snapping me out of my thoughts. It was a text from Ben, checking in again. Asterisk, how are you holding up? Asterisk, it read. I hesitated for a moment before typing a response. Asterisk, I told her it's over. I don't think there's any way back from this. Asterisk, the reply came almost immediately. Asterisk, I'm sorry, man. I know that couldn't have been easy, but you did what you had to do. You deserve better than living in constant doubt. Asterisk, I stared at the message, feeling a dull ache in my chest. Ben was right. I did deserve better than the uncertainty, the lies, the constant fear of being hurt again. But knowing that didn't make the pain of ending things any less real. I spent the next few days avoiding Natalie as much as possible. She stayed in the bedroom most of the time, and I spent my nights on the couch trying to figure out what my next move would be. The silence between us was suffocating, but I didn't know how to break it without reopening the wounds. Then, one morning, Natalie finally emerged from the bedroom. She looked exhausted, her eyes red and swollen from days of crying. She stood in the doorway, watching me for a moment before speaking. We need to talk about what happens next, she said softly, her voice hoarse. I nodded, knowing this conversation was inevitable. We couldn't just keep living in the same house, pretending things hadn't fallen apart. We needed to make decisions about the house, about our belongings, about everything we had shared. I think it's best if I move out, Natalie continued, her voice trembling. I'll stay with a friend for a while, just until we figure everything out. I didn't argue. It was probably the best option, given how strained things had become. The house was full of memories, and staying here together, even in silence, was too painful. When are you planning to leave? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Tomorrow, she replied, her eyes filling with tears again. I've already started packing. The reality of the situation hit me all over again. This was it. The end of our marriage, the end of us. Tomorrow, Natalie would walk out that door, and I didn't know if I'd ever see her again. The next day, I came home from work to find the house in disarray. Natalie's suitcases were packed and sitting by the front door. She was in the bedroom, quietly gathering the last of her things. I watched her for a moment, not knowing what to say. There was so much history between us, so many moments that had led us here. But now, standing on the edge of it all, I didn't have the words to sum up what I was feeling. Eventually, Natalie walked out of the bedroom, pulling her suitcases behind her. She paused in the hallway, looking at me with tear-filled eyes. "Ethan, I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I never wanted it to end like this." I swallowed the lump in my throat, trying to hold it together. "I know." She stood there for a moment longer, as if waiting for me to say something else. But there was nothing left to say. We both knew this was the end. With a deep breath, Natalie opened the front door and walked out of our home. I watched her leave, the sound of the door closing behind her echoing through the empty house. And just like that, she was gone. I stood there in the silence, staring at the closed door, feeling the full weight of what had just happened. Our marriage, our life together was over. And for the first time in weeks, I felt something close to relief. It was painful, yes, but it was also freeing. The constant doubt, the mistrust, the lies. It was all behind me now. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing. I was ready to start over. The house felt eerily quiet after Natalie left. Every corner of it was filled with memories. Good ones, bad ones, and everything in between. But now it was just me, alone. I wandered from room to room, taking in the emptiness, trying to adjust to this new reality. It didn't feel like home anymore. The next few days were tough. I struggled to find a sense of normalcy, of routine. Coming home to an empty house felt like a daily reminder of what I had lost. But at the same time, I knew this was the beginning of something new, even if it didn't feel like it yet. I threw myself into work, trying to distract myself from the void left by Natalie's absence. My boss, thankfully, had been understanding during the past few weeks, knowing something personal was weighing on me. But now that I was officially on my own, I couldn't use work as a crutch forever. I had to face the reality of starting over. One evening, about a week after Natalie had left, I sat down in the living room with a beer and started going through our old photo albums. Pictures of vacations, birthdays, family gatherings. They all told the story of a life I once thought was solid. Now, those memories felt like ghosts of a past I no longer recognized. Looking through those pictures, I realized that the pain of Natalie's betrayal wasn't just about losing her. It was about losing the future I had envisioned for us. I had spent years building a life with her, planning for our future, and now all of that was gone. I wasn't just grieving the end of our relationship. I was grieving the loss of the life I thought we would have together. After spending an hour or so going through the albums, I decided to put them away. They were reminders of a life that no longer existed, and holding onto them wasn't going to help me move forward. I needed to start thinking about what came next, about how I could rebuild on my own. The next day, I called Ben to catch up. I hadn't spoken to him much since Natalie left, and I figured it was time to reconnect. Ben had always been there for me, offering advice and support when I needed it most, and now was no different. "How are you holding up?" Ben asked when we met up at a local bar. "I'm managing," I replied, taking a sip of my drink. "It's strange, being in the house alone. Everything reminds me of her. But at the same time, it's a relief, you know? No more lies. No more wondering if I can trust her." Ben nodded. "Yeah, I get that. Sometimes the hardest part isn't the breakup itself. It's the uncertainty that comes before it. Once you make the decision, things start to get clearer." "Exactly," I said. "I still don't know what the future holds, but at least I'm not stuck in that limbo anymore." We talked for a while, and Ben listened patiently as I unloaded everything I had been feeling. It felt good to talk to someone who understood, someone who wasn't judging me for how conflicted I had been. At some point during the conversation, Ben leaned forward and gave me a piece of advice I hadn't expected. "You've been through hell, Ethan. But don't forget, this is your chance to start fresh. You've got a clean slate now. Use it. His words stuck with me long after we parted ways. A clean slate. I hadn't thought of it that way before. For so long, I had been stuck in the past, haunted by what had happened between me and Natalie. But now that she was gone, I had the opportunity to rebuild my life on my own terms. That night, I lay in bed thinking about what Ben had said. It was true. I didn't have to let the past define me. I could create a new future, one where I was in control, where I didn't have to carry the weight of Natalie's betrayal. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of hope. It was small, fragile, but it was there. I wasn't fully healed, and I knew it would take time. But I had taken the first step toward rebuilding my life, and that was something. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in a long time. I went to work, did my job, and when I came home, I didn't feel the same crushing loneliness that had been hanging over me for weeks. Instead, I felt ready to move forward, ready to figure out what came next. It wasn't going to be easy, and I knew there would be hard days ahead. But for the first time in a long time, I believed that maybe, just maybe, I could start over. With Natalie gone, the house started to feel less like a prison and more like a blank canvas. I had spent so long associating every corner of this place with memories of our life together. But now, those memories were fading. I had a choice, to let this space stay haunted by the past or to make it my own again. One weekend, I decided to start small. I spent Saturday cleaning out the bedroom, going through everything Natalie had left behind. Old clothes, shoes, forgotten trinkets. They all held traces of her, but none of it felt like it belonged here anymore. I packed it all into boxes, leaving them by the door to drop off at her friend's place. It was a strange, cathartic process, like I was finally reclaiming my own space. After cleaning, I rearranged the furniture. It wasn't anything drastic, but it felt symbolic. Moving the bed, shifting the dresser, each small change made the room feel a little more like mine and a little less like a shared space. I wanted this place to reflect who I was becoming, not who I had been with her. Once the bedroom was done, I moved on to the living room. I threw out the old couch we had bought together years ago and replaced it with a new one, something that fit my style better. I even bought some artwork for the walls, abstract pieces that I never would have considered before. It was like I was slowly piecing together a new version of myself, one step at a time. When Ben came over the following week, he immediately noticed the changes. "Wow, man, this place looks different," he said, glancing around the living room. "It feels lighter." "Yeah," I nodded, taking pride in the fact that I had managed to turn the house into something that felt like mine again. "I guess it's part of moving on." Ben sat down on the new couch, raising an eyebrow. "And how's that going?" I shrugged, leaning back in my chair. "Better than I expected. It's still tough some days, but I'm starting to feel like myself again. Or at least like someone new." "That's good," Ben said, genuinely happy for me. "It takes time, but you're getting there." We spent the rest of the evening hanging out, talking about everything except Natalie. It was a relief, really, to have a conversation that didn't revolve around the mess she had left behind. I was tired of letting her be the center of my world, tired of giving her that power over me. This was my life now, and I was determined to make the most of it. A few weeks later, I decided to take Ben's advice about using this time to start fresh. I had always enjoyed photography. It had been a hobby of mine before things got so serious with work and life. So, I dug out my old camera, dusted it off, and decided to get back into it. At first, it felt strange, like picking up an old habit that didn't quite fit anymore. But the more I used the camera, the more natural it felt. I started going for walks in the evenings, capturing small moments, sunsets, city streets, quiet corners of parks. It gave me something to focus on, something to look forward to. One evening, while I was out taking photos, I ran into Holly, the young woman who had approached Natalie and me at the restaurant that fateful night months ago. I hadn't seen her since, and seeing her now brought back a rush of emotions I hadn't expected. "Hey," she said, recognizing me immediately. "Ethan, right?" I nodded, feeling a little awkward. "Yeah. Holly, right?" She smiled, her expression kind but cautious. Yeah, it's been a while. How've you been? I hesitated, not sure how much to share. I've been better, but I'm getting through it. Holly nodded, understanding. I'm sorry about everything that happened. I didn't mean to make things worse that night. It's not your fault, I said quickly. What happened between Natalie and me, it was going to happen eventually. You didn't cause any of it. We stood there in silence for a moment before Holly broke the tension with a question. Are you still into photography? I glanced down at the camera in my hands and smiled. Yeah, actually, just getting back into it. That's great, she said, her eyes lighting up. It's a good way to clear your head, you know? Find some perspective. Yeah, I agreed, realizing that's exactly what photography had become for me. A way to regain control, to see the world through a different lens. Holly and I chatted for a bit longer before parting ways, but that brief conversation stuck with me. It was a reminder that life was still happening, still moving forward, even when it felt like everything had stopped. And maybe, just maybe, I could find my place in that forward motion. As I walked home that evening, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. It wasn't overwhelming or all-consuming, but it was there. And for the first time in months, I was okay with that. As the days turned into weeks, life began to feel more settled. The house, once filled with painful memories, now felt like a place of growth and renewal. I had transformed it much like I was transforming myself. Each small change, a new piece of furniture, a different photo on the wall, was a reminder that I was rebuilding, piece by piece, from the ashes of my old life. I kept myself busy with photography, diving deeper into it than I ever had before. It wasn't just a hobby anymore. It had become a way for me to see the world with fresh eyes. Through the lens of my camera, I began to appreciate the small moments again. The way the light hit the trees at sunset, the calm stillness of the early morning streets. Photography helped me focus on the present, rather than letting the weight of the past drag me down. One weekend, I decided to put myself out there and enter a local photography contest. It was a small event, nothing fancy, but it was a step. I submitted a few of my best shots, not expecting much but wanting to share my work with others. To my surprise, I received positive feedback. My photos were selected to be displayed at a small gallery downtown. Standing in that gallery, seeing my work on the wall, I felt a surge of pride. It wasn't about the recognition, it was about proving to myself that I could move forward, that I could build something new, something that was entirely my own. Ben came to the gallery to support me, of course. He stood beside me, admiring the photos, and gave me a proud slap on the back. "Look at you," he said with a grin, "making a comeback." I laughed, shaking my head. "It's just a small gallery, Ben." "Doesn't matter," he replied. "You're doing something you love, and you're putting yourself out there. That's what counts." I smiled, realizing how right he was. It wasn't about the size of the achievement. It was about the fact that I was moving forward. I was creating new memories, building a new life, one that wasn't defined by Natalie or by the pain she had caused. After the gallery show, I walked home through the city, feeling lighter than I had in a long time. The air was crisp, the sky clear, and for the first time in months, I felt at peace. Not the forced kind of peace that comes from trying to push away the pain, but real peace, the kind that comes from accepting the past and choosing to move forward. Natalie was still a part of my story, of course. She always would be, but she no longer held the power to dictate my future. What we had was over, and while it had hurt more than I ever thought possible, I had survived. More than that, I had come out the other side stronger, more sure of who I was and what I wanted. As I reached my front door, I paused for a moment, looking up at the house. It felt different now, no longer a place of sadness, but a place of possibility. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, feeling that familiar sense of comfort wash over me. This was my space now, my life. And for the first time in a long time, I was excited to see what came next. That night, as I sat down with my camera, reviewing the photos from the gallery show, I couldn't help but smile. This was the start of something new, something entirely my own. The wounds from the past were still there, but they were healing. And in their place, I was building something beautiful. Life hadn't turned out the way I had planned, but maybe that was okay. Maybe the unexpected twists and turns were part of the journey. And maybe, just maybe, the best was yet to come. As I shut off my camera and turned off the lights, I realized that, for the first time in months, I wasn't afraid of the future anymore. I was ready for it. Whatever came next, I knew I could handle it. I had already survived the worst, and now I was ready to live again.